digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Steve Dan from Amplified Robot, and we're joined by Julian Williams, who's going to explain to us all about his wonderful new device that is best explained by his good self. So Julian, why don't you explain to us a little bit more about who you are and exactly what it is you do?
Hi, I'm Julian. I've worked for BBC for a long time, so I've worked in media for decades. We've created a device to allow you to walk through VR. Not just walk through VR, but also do things like snowboarding, skateboarding actions. What we find is if you're stood up and feel as if you're moving around, your sense of presence within VR is vastly improved. And it also has very many benefits in terms of preventing motion sickness and other side effects.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julian. And Steve, why don't you remind our listeners exactly who you are and what you do?
Hi, everybody. Steve Dan. I'm the CEO of Amplified Robot, and my company, Amplified Robot, does everything and anything in augmented reality and virtual reality space. I also run a big meetup group called Augmenting Reality, and in fact, it's now the world's largest VR meetup group. So we just added a few more members on and got that accolade. So we're very happy about that.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about something that is not directly heads-up display related, because I know that we've had this conversation many times now, Steve, around VR. But today we're going to talk around some of the peripherals to do with VR, and I think that's especially relevant since Julian is with us today. But one of the things that we haven't been hearing quite so much about yet, but I think it's going to happen soon, is things like haptic control or haptic experiences. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Steve, on what you think are going to be the most significant kind of next steps for people who are working within haptics.
Well, I think haptics are going to be very, very important. We're working on a couple of projects. We're working on one main project, which is using virtual reality to train surgeons and doctors and nurses. And one of the things that we're looking forward to is to have fantastic tactile haptic feedback. We've seen a number of devices on the market, but it's early stages yet. It's got a long way to go. I say that right now, at the moment, the sort of head-up displays are getting much, much better. The audio is getting fantastic. But one of the things that I'd certainly like to see is some really good advances in the haptic devices. Lots of different ways that people are trying it, with gloves that you can put on, sensors that fit on your upper arm, also exoskeleton-style haptic devices. We're still looking at them all, and they all take us that little bit closer to what I want. We're not quite there yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen very soon. So
actually, it occurs to me that for some of our listeners, we're kind of already babbling about things like haptics, and we haven't actually explained what it means.
Yes. Well, haptic feedback is really sort of being able to feel something that isn't actually there. So when you've donned a virtual reality headset and you can see your hands in front of you, you should be able to use your hands to pick up virtual objects that appear in front of you as if they're real objects. And it's the feedback you're getting from your fingertips and your hands that is the haptic feedback that enables you to actually pick up an egg, but pick up an egg gently without cracking it.
Okay, so I'm interested to hear from you, Julian, in terms of, obviously you're working with kind of more the movement system in terms of walking in and shuffling around in VR, so to speak. I say shuffling because I've seen what people do on your device. But from your perspective, do you think that haptic interaction, haptic response is something that you're going to be able to do at the same time as using your device?
That's potentially true. I'm a big one for sort of taking baby steps and walking before you can run. So after the HMD, I think either touch or locomotion are going to be the next most important things. And so that's what we've concentrated on. Mm-hmm. But I'm very intrigued by the sort of ingenuity that's going into haptic feedback, touch sensors, or the feeling maybe some of these devices prevent your fingers moving beyond a certain point as a way of simulating touching the surface. What they all involve is very clever mechanical engineering ideas and material science ideas. And therefore, they're a bit more interesting to the average user because it's not just a new piece of software.
So I'm curious from your perspective, and actually I'm going to open this up to both of you gents, but one of the videos that was shown at the last meetup group was the Samsung roller coaster at CES. Now, I don't know because I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure. But I get the impression that there wasn't any other inputs, shall we say, or kind of haptic interactions other than a headset on your head, earphones on your ears, and your chair is moving around. What do you think is the value of, for example, a fan, a little bit of wind, so you get a sense of that movement, that motion as you're swirling around on that roller coaster? What do you think the benefits are of these other external experiential experiences? I'll put that to you first, Steve.
Well, I think that it's every little bit helps. Every little thing that you're doing that's actually tricking, fooling your senses into believing that you could be experiencing something else and you could be somewhere else, always helps. And it's very interesting. Years ago, I went on a Disney ride, which is a sort of rocket to the moon, and that actually uses a very, very simple chair movement, a little bit up and a little bit down. And the actual travel is less than half an inch. But even that travel up and down, combined with the visuals, gave one the exact feeling of either becoming pushed down in the seat as the rocket took off and feeling extreme gravity, and also when it reached its apogee, you got totally weightless. Well, you didn't get, but you just felt as though you were getting. So all these things just add to the illusion. And let's face it, virtual reality is the ultimate illusion.
What's your take on that, Julian?
Well, I agree with Steve, and I particularly like the fact that you don't need to do much to trick your mind into thinking that you're really there. And I believe in that, as in the way, as you say, our shuffle is really the minimum viable way of making your brain think that you're actually walking, and it's incredibly effective. So you don't have to absolutely replicate what you're doing. In fact, if you're going through a lot of physical exertion, that might not be what you want at all. You just want the excitement. You don't want all the tedious parts of it. So I think a lot of these simple effects are really going to work. The fan you mentioned, the best use of that I saw was Ignition did a demonstration based on the classic VR example where you're walking a plank. They had you walking out of a door 600 foot up under a skyscraper, and you had to walk across a rickety plank. And they actually had a plank, but it was about half an inch high on the ground, and they had a fan blowing at you to simulate the wind. I could not take a step. I was rigid. I knew exactly what was going on, but my brain would not let me walk forward. And I was very aware of, as you say, just the wind blowing on you and how much impact that has on you.
I'm curious because obviously I've seen your device up close and personal. By the way, let's, for the purpose of our listeners, let's name the device in question so they all know exactly what they're looking for.
Well, the company is WizDish, and our product is called the Rovr, R-O-V-R. And it's basically a shallow dish, which we've patented as an idea for locomotion, because you slide your feet pendulums in opposite direction. And from that, you'll get they've got low friction footwear. You kind of skate on the spot, but it's not quite the same because you're not lunging. The concave surface is the same as if you're walking, but both feet are weight bearing. So that's the sort of curve it is. It's quite a shallow curve, but it works extremely well.
So here's my question in regards to the Rovr, because I find it completely fascinating and also deeply amusing to watch some people, shuffling along and what have you. But you talk about this idea that actually it helps to reduce the problem with motion sickness. Now, we all know with VR, part of the problem that causes that motion sickness is your brain is telling you that your body is doing something contrary to what your brain is seeing. And therefore, that causes conflict and you end up feeling motion sick. Now, I'm curious, from the perspective of the Rovr, whether or not you feel that by walking around and being able to walk around, that's going to completely remove that problem of motion sickness? Or do you think it's just something that will only work in certain circumstances?
It works in most circumstances. It doesn't work for everybody because, remember, some people get sick just watching television. But what we find is because you're linking exactly what the inner ear is expecting from what you're seeing, that is one of the key causes of motion sickness. It's because you're offending the brain's ability to anticipate what's going to happen. Most of what your brain does is anticipate. That's your sight and everything. It's a wonderful, interesting area of neurology to investigate. But they've even recently discovered that, for instance, you do literally see your recently dead pet half walk through the door, for instance, because you're expecting them to, so you actually see it. So the importance of being able to turn physically when you're in VR means that as I said, you're linking, they call it vestibular visual discrepancy. So what you can, if you just sit at a monitor and there's no movement, you're just watching a monitor and you're using your joystick and spinning round, this problem doesn't happen for everybody because a known thing in your brain can anticipate what's going to happen. Mm. The effect you're getting is very much like watching somebody else over your shoulder watch a computer game where you have no idea where they're going to turn next, and that's much more likely to make you ill. Mm. So this is what we're eradicating by using locomotion. Okay,
but this brings me to another kind of interesting related question, which is I think one of the things that we have established is that it's great to have a 360-degree environment in VR or in 360 film even. But the reality is actually most people aren't really looking more than 180. And that's just purely because of the habits that we've formed when we consume media and we're watching entertainment, is that we really don't have a reason to necessarily want to look behind us. It's great for the first couple of tries when we're experimenting in the fact that, I can look behind me, and that's great. But actually, the reality is most of us don't really necessarily shift beyond that 180. Do you think that this is something that will be kind of a challenge to re-educate the population, so to speak? Steve, what's your thought?
That's an interesting question, because I think there's no real reason to look fully in 360 degree all the time. And I think there will be an awful lot of product that comes out in virtual reality that will only actually be in 180. Because I'm thinking, for instance, that I've seen some stuff where people have recorded bands on stage, and basically behind the band is a backdrop. There's nothing to see, really. So they're not they don't need to use the full 360. And also, it's great. There are some fantastic chairs and things like that you can sit in, and you can move around. You can move around in full 360, which is brilliant. And that's fantastic, especially for gaming and things like that. But other things, I think you're going to get people are actually going to sit in rigid chairs. They're probably actually going to sit in a comfy seat. They might even be sitting on their sofa. And if doing that, then it's actually quite difficult to look around in 360. So I think it's one of those sort of things. I think it's going to be horses for courses. And again, people are going, because it's all so new, Tanya, people are experimenting with this and trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. Because also that actually comes down to the thing, if you are doing a complete 360 degree view and you're not actually going to be watching it all the time, does what's behind you, does that have to be in full high definition quality? No, it doesn't. So if you can sort of trick your operating system into just actually giving you high definition view, exactly what you're looking at, reducing the actual high definition from everything else, then you're actually going to be able to put more things in your app. You're going to be able to put more things in the game. And actually, it's going to make it a lot better for a lot better experience. Again, this is all in its infancy, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly which way it goes. I think there's no right and there's no wrong way to do it. It depends on the effect that you're trying to get and the effect that you're trying to give the viewer.
I do think it's possibly interesting for the film industry versus the games industry folk who are going to be so busy trying to experiment with a full 360 environment and to record something that's happening in 360, and actually might be a tip for them to think about just doing it in 180 to start with rather than trying to do 360 from the get-go. But Julian, what's your thought on this?
Well, I think this has already been done. The recent examples, Rewind did Strictly Come Dancing.
Yes.
And they explained that they've used a technique which I think is quite common in 360 video, where you have a very high resolution stereoscopic camera pointing forward at the point of interest, and then a ring of GoPro cameras around you just taking fairly low resolution, non-stereoscopic to fill in the 360. Because actually the audience is behind you and they're in the dark, so that's not that interesting. Most things you say, if you're at a tennis match, a football match, whatever, you tend to have the point of interest in front of you. So not just save cost, but also save bandwidth and things like that. You don't have to send the entire 360 at the same resolution as Steve was mentioning.
Absolutely. I'm curious from your perspective with the walking as well. Do you think that there will be a lot of application for people who are trying to create an experience that is in 360, even though you're kind of walking around? Because again, when we're walking, if I'm walking down the street in central London, I'm not necessarily going to suddenly turn around behind me to check what's going on back there. I'm going to keep on going forwards to wherever it is I'm intending to go.
Yes, this was used by advantage by the British Army recently, of using rovers as part of their recruitment campaign for officers. They're taking these huge trucks around universities, and in the centrepiece of that is a rover that you stand on, and you, in that, do the Sandhurst assault course. Now, when you're doing that, you're amongst a patrol, a squad of soldiers following your instructor. And so, yes, your focus is always where you're going. It would be a bit obtuse to go off to the side, and you would certainly get shouted at, I'm sure, if you were actually there. But that's actually quite a model that worked really well. I didn't think the 360 could be used that well on something like a 360 locomotion platform, and yet it worked incredibly well. And I can see other applications. For instance, if you're being shown a house, you might do a 360 of the person showing you around the house, the estate agent. And again, you tend to follow them from room to room in the same way. There, you might want to have a 360 while you're in the room. Yes, there's still this forward progression, if you like. Yeah, I can see this being used, taken advantage of quite a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they talk about 360, and certainly from a filmmaking perspective, it tends to be that the assumption is okay, let's just stick our camera in the middle of the action and let the action happen around us, versus actually we can move this camera. There can be forward motion or sideways motion of that camera in 360. Is actually kind of more of a technical challenge for some people who are exploring this. So I think that's quite interesting to see how people will utilise something like the Rovr in order to facilitate that kind of forward motion or to a narrative motion. But Steve, I'm curious from your perspective, aside from things like the Rovr, what other peripherals are you seeing at the moment that you think really do have the potential to shift the way people are thinking about VR at the moment?
Well, I suppose it sort of goes a little bit back to the way that people are trying out different controllers. And I think that's actually going to determine whether people get a really good virtual reality experience. Now, HTC are bringing out different types of hand controllers to Oculus. And in actual fact, when you get the new Oculus, it comes with two different types of handheld controllers. One which is more complicated and it is designed to be used for more gaming applications. And one which is very, very simple, just almost a 2 or 3 button one that actually fits in one hand. And that's actually worked quite well for them. So I think you can actually get a little bit too worried about controllers and devices like that. And I don't know whether this is a device because it sort of fits into the headset, but I'm very sort of keen on the work that's been done in Japan by a company called Fuse, which is on eye tracking, because I think that's something which is also going to be very important and very useful to people working in virtual reality. Which
may be worth us mentioning more about Fove. Would you like to explain about Fove, or shall I?
Well, why don't you? You start off and I'll...
No, just for our listeners, I know that there are some people who aren't necessarily au fait with all of the different headsets and devices out there, but Fove is one of those headsets that is utilising eye tracking to allow you to control the experience. So, for example, if you look at a specific character, for example, it allows you to shift your focus to that character and maybe activate experience. And the Fove was used very recently for piano playing to allow somebody who is disabled and not therefore able to play the piano to utilise his eye tracking to actually play concert on the piano. So actually eye tracking is one of those things that actually the Fove is really offering a new type of experience that is much more natural. If you look at somebody eye-to-eye contact, when you're watching a film, for example, and you have that eye contact with something, it activates them next, line of the film or the next action in the game, for example. That's much more of a natural interaction than necessarily, having to point and click on something or to do something fancy with some kind of handheld device. Using our eyes is a much more natural form of control. Anything to add to that, Steve?
No, I totally agree on that. And one of the first people to back Fove on Kickstarter. I've seen it a number of times. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's going to be very, very big in the VR space. And I wish to young people that started it off all the best, because I think it's something which is definitely needed and it's going to become very, very useful.
There's a couple of points on that. As you say, eye contact is a very powerful emotional effect between human beings. If somebody's not looking at you directly in the eye, you could be offended. If they are, you really do notice it. It sort of doubles your attention. The other thing I find interesting about Fove, you've probably come across something called foveated rendering. The idea with this is that if you know exactly where somebody's looking in an image within the HMD, you can use that to your advantage to either make that come into focus. You can reduce the amount of bandwidth you're using to render the rest of the scene, because you've only got an acuity of like 1.5 degrees or something like that with eyesight. I mean, that's really a cost-saving thing. It means you're saving bandwidth, but they're just interesting side effect of that sort of technology.
Absolutely. And again, for the listeners who aren't necessarily aware, HMD, head-mounted display. Sorry, I'm going to keep on doing this because I'm so aware that there are people who may be listening going, what the heck are these people talking about? What I'm going to ask you is that we like to ask everybody on our sessions what they think is going to be the most significant change that's going to occur in the next 5 to 10 years that will impact the way you do business. Now, that could be a cultural shift, it could be a technological shift, but putting your futurology cap on, Steve, what do you think is going to be that significant change for the way that you do business?
Wow, there's so many things to choose from. What I'm always looking forward to is better connectivity, because that's going to enable us to do an awful lot more. So I can't wait for 5G to come in. Anything that's actually going to make it that we can run devices and we can actually stream to devices huge amounts of data, that will make a big difference to what we're doing.
Out of interest, do you have a stance on things like Li-Fi?
Yeah, that's looking pretty interesting. It's one of those sort of things. I really hope it works. because in actual fact,
Yeah.
I've got to backtrack slightly as well, because I saw something the other day and it sort of goes into what we were talking about haptic things before. And there's this company that's actually started something on Kickstarter called the Tesla suit, which I don't know if you've heard about that. It's a full body haptic suit. And I've just been sort of reminding me of what they're doing and what they're trying to do. And it looks quite interesting. And yeah, I would quite like to get hold of one of those and see how it goes. And something like that, again, could have a big impact on some of the things that we've got in the pipeline, or some of the things that we'd really like to do if it was possible. It looks cool, looks interesting. I suppose the only other thing is, are people going to want to don a full body haptic suit? What do you think?
Well, this is a question that I'm kind of getting to, which is that whole, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You know, that's one of my mantras. You've heard me say it many times now, but I'm kind of curious as to, do we get to that stage where actually VR just becomes such a, you know, a superfluous experience that we're kind of like, why don't we just, you know, take off the technology and get back to good old-fashioned human interaction, eye-to-eye contact with a real human being? Is that possible anymore? I don't know. But yeah, I think haptics, a full bodysuit could be kind of perhaps a step over the edge for some people. I think it's going to be one of those things very niche. It'll be for pure gamers, I think, to start off with.
Totally agree.
But having said that, there's this very interesting thing called the sub pack, which is kind of like a backpack. It's actually quite fun. It's a backpack that turns into vibration. So you can feel the vibration of the music when you listen to the music. Now, I think it's really interesting. I haven't had one on my back just yet, but the thing is that they look very slick, very sci-fi. You know, when you put them on, it's very Beats-esque in its branding and styling. But the main concern is you walk down the street with one of those, and the likelihood is you're going to get stopped by somebody because you've got something vibrating on your back. And it's like, excuse me, sir, what do you think you're carrying with that thing on your back? So, you know, just slight concerns whether or not the haptic suit is necessarily going to work. Yeah, I think it could be interesting for the gamers, but maybe not for the general population just yet.
I think so. Yeah, you're absolutely right for the gamers about certainly sort of shoot 'em up games and fighting games and things like that. I think it can add an awful lot to it. But actually, you're right, it could also do something for music, because I know a lot of bands, certainly a lot of bands that I go to see, that what they really want to do is they want the bass pumping out and they really want you to feel it in your midriff. And that's part of the experience of going to a concert.
I mean, there is nothing that quite replaces that experience of a live music gig and feeling the music practically resonate through you as you stand there and you're listening to the music. And I do think the subpack is quite interesting in that respect. And combining that, for example, with VR music gigs, absolutely, yeah. I think it could really be something very interesting. And in fact, you know, we'll probably get some back on the session and we'll talk about that very thing. But in the meantime, Julian, what would you say is going to be the significant change for you in the next 5 to 10 years and is going to completely change the face of your industry?
I think it's going to be the variable focus on the head-mounted displays. We're coming back to that, I'm afraid, not peripherals. I look forward to the day when you can buy one pair of high-tech glasses and they'll do AR, VR, movie watching, and act as a pair of reading glasses. That is actually, the reason I would say the last one is I tried some Sony glasses out, the site they've been using to give subtitles to people in cinemas. You can wear special glasses. And I looked at it and you have to have something dark behind, otherwise you can't read the writing if it's white. But it's absolutely in focus in the way I've not been able to do for a couple of years, because you can set it at infinity. So whatever the distance the text genuinely is, doesn't matter. You can put it where it's comfortable to read. Now, if you think about virtually everybody ends up with some kind of reading glasses. So you talk about all of the world's population and those sorts of numbers. And you think how resistant people are to buying their first pair of reading glasses, because it's really not something you want to go out and buy. If you suddenly found your high-tech glasses already did it, that's quite an opportunity, I think.
Do you think it will skip from being glasses and something you put on your face to actually something you just put straight into the eye? I say this because I remember, and I think I talked about this with you, Steve, before, seeing a story about a new contact lens that could be inserted. It's actually for eye surgery. It's to give you 20/20 vision. And rather than have laser surgery or mess around with the actual surface of the eye, you just have this eye wash that you wash into your eye. And when you do, it all folded up lens inside it that unfolds onto the surface of your eye and then hardens. And that then works to give you 20/20 vision. But the idea that could become a delivery mechanism in the future for, you know, specialist contact lenses that do have the technology within them to be able to provide you with all of these experiences, whether it's AR, VR, or corrective eye surgery, or being able to read subtitles. Do you think that's going to potentially be a thing?
Oh yeah, I think that's definitely possible. There's an augmented reality set of glasses out there that actually you have to wear contact lenses with them as well, because the contact lenses help you focus on what's on the glass in front of you. Now, I'm not sure if people are going to wear contact lenses and glasses. I think that's a little bit, taking a little bit too far. But for sure, I think that augmented reality contact lenses are not that far in the future, as I think it's definitely doable. And, well, Google are doing contact lenses now, which actually measure your glucose level for diabetics and things like that. So I think that'll happen. And I think also a lot of people will actually sort of take whatever it is to get enhanced eyesight. You've only got to see the number of people that will actually undertake laser surgery, laser corrective eye surgery. And that's actually quite a drastic thing to do when you think about it. But a lot of people are doing it.
What's your thought on that, Julian?
I'm always a bit old school and things like this.
You don't want to put things in your eyes.
Yeah, sunglasses are fine for most people to wear, and I have a feeling even putting anything on your eye, if there's a simple pair of glasses you can pop on when you want to do something and take them off, that's going to be popular for a long time, I think. Although, as Steve says, you are going to find these things coming in sooner than you imagine. The other thing I was going to say, you were talking about how to contact people in VR. Something I'd like to say on that is that you probably use FaceTime and things like that on phones. And what gets me with that is you very rarely stare somebody straight in the face from 2 foot away and stay like that. And that is kind of what you're having to do when you're using FaceTime. I think VR is going to be interesting because you are going to be able to just hang out in the same room and glance at them when you're talking and not when you're not, sort of thing. This is what I think is going to be a better form of video communication than video telephones were ever going to be.
I don't know, I feel like we're getting closer and closer to the future that was depicted in the film Her. I don't know if you saw that. When do we get to the stage where people fall in love with artificial beings? Because it's already happening in the games industry.
Yes.
The MMO games, people are already falling in love with each other digitally from a distance, and people have been married, Minecraft players have been married, and, World of Warcraft players have been married, and etc. But when do we get to that stage where actually it's an artificial intelligence in virtual reality and somebody falls for it? That's what I think we're getting to.
It will happen. I think a lot of love is companionship. And these things are going to get very good at being companions.
And Tanya, I'm sure a lot of people have fallen in love with Laura Croft.
Or parts of her.
Well, gentlemen, as always, we'd like to give our listeners a way to be able to follow up and find out who you are, what you're up to, stalk you if necessary. So would you care to share with us your social media handle of choice? Julian?
Yes, we're just Wizdish.
Wizdish.
Yes, Wizdish.
Wonderful. And Steve?
Yes, I've got two handles. One's AR Reality. That's ARREALITY. And the other one's at Beric Post. That's BERWICKPOST.
Wonderful. And since we've got you here, Stephen, and we've just had one of the VR meetups, why don't you tell us about the date for the next one and the location for the next one in case anybody who's listening would like to come along?
Right. We're actually just finalising the location. It's probably going to be where we held one before in the St Luke's Community Hall in Camberwell. And it's on the 24th of February. And it's all about gaming and virtual reality.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, guys, on this Digital Jam session. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And thanks again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. digitaljamsessions.com